Good? All right, I told Menno I didn't want to try that new Master Boat computer system, but it is what it is. I don't know what to say. So again, John Adey, I know we have some people there. I work with the American Boat Yacht Council. I've been there for about 15 years now. So did some time in the technical department, as did my friend Joe Doreen were here with me back in the early days. And now they tell me I run the place. So it's an interesting job, and I enjoy it quite a bit. One of the things we do get to do quite a lot is work with the international community. The European Union, if you don't know, is the largest consumer market on the planet other than China. So if you are making some kind of product, where do you want to sell it? The US and the EU. And the way to get into the EU is by following some kind of directive. I don't care whether you're making toilet seats or boats, you're going to have to follow some kind of directive. So what Randy asked me to speak on today was what we know about the new directive, and obviously there's going to be some questions about the existing directive. But before we get there, I want to give you the size and scope of ABYC. This is something I came up with for a board presentation up in Canada. And a lot of people don't know these things about ABYC and about what we do. And for those of you who don't know ABYC, maybe on the internet somewhere, it's the American Boat Yacht Council. But we have 16 project technical committees. Those are the groups that develop standards. It's not just our technical director sitting in his office doing it. We have over 3,000 members. Many of you in the room here are members of ours. We have 400 volunteers that write the standards. We just had a recent Standards Week meeting, and I think we had 185 engineers through the doors during the meetings that week. We have 5,000 active certifications of our 8 different certifications, and those are held by about 3,000 certified technicians. So a lot of people have multi-certs. And then we have 16 employees in 5 states. We are expanding, and we're all over the place. So even though our home is in Annapolis, we have offices in Portland, Oregon, in Newport, Rhode Island, in Cadillac, Michigan, in Jupiter, Florida, as well as now one in New Jersey, which I'm a guy from New Jersey, so I'm proud of it. Everybody else in the office doesn't want to talk about it, so it's the way it is. But that's really the scope of ABYC today. Great company to work for. I really enjoy it. I don't see myself going anywhere anytime soon. But again, Randy didn't have me here to talk about ABYC. I'm going to talk about the European directive. It's a very, very interesting time to be looking at the effect of the directive and some of the things that are happening right now. Not only with our change in regime here in the United States, but also with our friend in the UK and their Brexit vote, because it affected some boat builders dramatically. I'll tell you why in a little bit. The current directive that we're working toward that came into force January 18th of 2017, so just very recently, was actually, they put pen to paper in 2013. The one prior to that was 1996, okay? So you can see there were some significant changes in boating, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is the directive. Builders have had 4 to 5 years to figure out what's really going on, even longer than that, with this new directive. So you have some major companies in the United States who were on this, who were involved with ABYC, who were reading our notes from our ISO meetings, and they knew it was happening. You also have some major boat companies in the United States who completely ignored it and are now trying to get engineers up and running to be able to deal with the changes, and their boats are being stopped at the border. It's just what's happening. So it is a conundrum for some and an opportunity for some. It depends on what you decided to do when you heard this news. But if you think about what we were doing in boating in 1996 and what we're doing in boating in 2013 when the new directive came out, some very significant changes happened. The directive is not very detailed. The directive gives you some very basic guidance on what a boat needs to do or what a boat can't do, and I'll give you some very good examples of that as we go into the presentation. But you're looking at things like electric propulsion, okay? Not even a thought in 1996 for boats, or people were dabbling in it. I mean, they've had electric propulsion since World War I submarines, but what we're looking at here is a significant change. So how are they going to address that? Did they address all the boats they needed to address as they went through and looked at the directive? There were no canoes and kayaks in the original directive, for instance. They're one of the largest groups of boats that are out there. So there are a number of things that had to happen. Plus, in the European Union at the same time was this whole legal framework that was going on for every single product that was manufactured and sold in the European Union. Okay, originally, the EU was formed so that everybody could trade amongst themselves. When they realized how big a consumer market they were going to have, they had to figure out how to deal with external states and countries sending into the EU, and they had to do that a little bit better than they had in the old directive. So that's part of this legal framework that we talk And obviously, we're going to talk today about how it just affects us, not anyone else. And I'm going to rip through this because I know you guys want to go for lunch, but please stop me if you want to expand on something. The global view, again, I think we talked about that when we opened up. It's really, the idea is you want to sell, you have to comply. You have no choice. And then once you decide you're going to comply, who do you have to partner with, and what do you have to get done, and who do you have to pay attention to, and how much is it going to cost to actually make your product a viable product in the European Union? Okay, Europeans typically build ugly boats. Okay, so they love the guys. It doesn't get any better than this. I'm just telling you right now. This is funny. All right, so what they want is they want some American products. So American product sells very well over there. So the Europeans had a trade hold in the old directive to be able to have some kind of preference to European built product. Okay, and I'm insulting my friend from the UK by calling me European. I understand that, but I am bringing you into this this group. So that's when things had to change. The new directive is extremely inclusive of things that the old directive was not. If you were a manufacturer under the old directive, you were responsible for your product, and there was no recall issue. There was no sharing of data back and forth between states and countries. It was pretty much, you put the product on the market, you complied once, and then from there on, you complied forever. Okay, so if you built a Sea Ray 18-foot bow rider in 1997, you complied with the directive then until just a couple of weeks ago, you didn't have to change a thing. You could continue to sell that boat under that same declaration of conformity forever and ever, amen. Okay? In the United States, if you built the boat and you found that 3,000 models that you put on the US market had a B fuel hose instead of A fuel hose, you all know what I'm talking about, right? There is a federal recall system where you could, the manufacturer is responsible, you'd have to notify the owner, you'd have to set up a method of taking care of the recall. No such thing operated in Europe prior to this new directive. So what we have now is a very inclusive network of responsible parties. So everywhere from the raw material supplier all the way through to the way the boat gets to the customer, whether that's directly from a manufacturer or through a dealer network, they are all responsible for this. The distributor that distributes the boat or the part is now also responsible. The distributor can make a call to take something off the market. The other thing that's very popular in Europe too, more so than here, although we do it here as well, is Company A builds the hull, because they build wind turbine blades, they build bus shelters, they build all sorts of fiberglass things. Now they're building a boat. Company B is the one that actually finishes it and places it on the market. Who is responsible? Before, it was whoever put it on the market. So it didn't matter where you got the hull built, where you got anything built, if you put it on the market, you're responsible. Now, you can share the responsibility among everybody. Okay? And there's communication between all of the member states, so we can actually get a database together that says, well, a Sea Ray in, and I pick on Sea Ray just because it's easy. A Sea Ray was found in France with this B hose in it. We want to go and take a look at the Sea Rays that were sold in Italy, that were sold in the UK, that were sold in Spain, that were sold in Finland, and all that kind of stuff. So now there is a vehicle to be able to do this. Is it effective? We don't know yet. It only came into force just a couple of weeks ago. But that is a brand new overarching consequence of the new RCD. The thing that we're extremely excited about, and I'll show you how it actually works in a little bit, is there's a compliance for an alternate route. So let's step back a little bit. You've heard of the standards of the ISO, correct? I think everybody here in that room knows that. The Recreational Craft Directive says some very basic, what I call mom and apple pie statements. The boat shall not sink. Okay, that's what they say. So how do we prove that? There's a group over there called SEN or SENELEC, okay, depending on whether it's electrical or other stuff. And SEN and SENELEC have these advisors. These advisors are paid. They sit out on the ISO meetings that we go to, standards meetings, just like here in the US, except there's a bunch of foreigners over there. And they evaluate the standard as it is published to figure out whether it meets the intent of the RCD. So as a standards writer, the guy in the room that I want to get to know and take out to dinner and say hi to his wife and ask him how his family is my buddy that works for SEN. Okay, he happens to be a very reasonable individual right now. He's a great guy. In the past, we've had guys that are just not reasonable. So they take their interpretation of what they think they've heard, they put it down, SEN looks at it, they have no idea what a boat is or what an air conditioner is or what a stuffed animal is, okay, because they're doing all those things. And they look at it and they say, well, Stuart Carruthers said this is okay, so it must be okay. All right, and that's the way it is. We had no feedback. The new guy that we have there, we have great feedback with him. He's a great individual, and for a Brit, he's actually pretty funny. So he's a good guy, and we enjoy having dinner with him, and he's just been a partner with us instead of an adversary. So right now, when you write an ISO standard, we're pretty sure that the send guy is going to agree with what we're saying and that it will actually meet the directive. And if he does argue with us, we know that he's actually got a point, and we want to make sure that we can deal with his request. So that was the way things used to work. If you were a boat company, you would have to apply, you would have to comply with ABYC, US Coast Guard here, you would have to comply with ISO here, and then the two never met and tried to get them as close as possible, but we beat our heads against the wall for years trying to make this happen. It wasn't getting any closer. The new RCD gives us an alternate route. So there's another group here we haven't talked about called the notified body. Okay? The notified body is that group that's empowered by the European Union government to actually put the CE mark on a boat and approve it. Okay? So the European Union had, or the notified bodies had what was called Declaration of Conformity, and they would use the ISO standard. The fuel system meets ISO this, the electrical system meets 10237. And this is the way they do it because it was easy. It was presumption of conformity. The builder demonstrated they built to the ISO standard. They built to the ISO standard. They approved the ISO standard. It's done. The ISO standard is getting abundantly more complicated. There are 9 parts to a Scantlings document, and that's the construction of the boat. Rudders, bulkheads, you name it. You need an engineer, somebody that's got all sorts of programming background to be able to run the programs to deal with this. It's a very difficult thing. The European builders are getting upset with it. So when they saw this new alternate route, we knew it was there, and we were going to try to use the alternate route. The Europeans came to us, and they said, is there any way you can use this new alternate route to allow ABYC standards to comply with the RCD? And of course, we said no, we want no part of that. No, we actually said this is the greatest thing that's ever happened since sliced bread, because this is terrific. This is the best news ever if you're an ABYC builder, because you can build to one standard, and then you can go and sell it on the market, whether you built it, whether you're going to sell it in the US or the European Union. And by the way, there's other countries that like ISO as well, like New Zealand and Australia. You can sell it down there with no problem as well. So this is a great thing that has just happened to us in the last 6 to 9 months that we're working on right now. There are a few things we have to work on, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a minute. But the alternate route is the key. And finding a notified body that is forward-thinking enough to be able to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to just go ahead and do presumption of conformity rubber stamp. We're actually going to do some work, and we're going to use the ABYC standards. Once they do it once for one builder and they decide it complies, it's a template for the rest of them. So we're extremely excited about this. I think this is a terrific thing, especially for surveyors, because you're building one boat and one goes to Europe and one comes back to the European builders that want to build ABYC because it's simpler and it's cheaper and has the same level of safety. So you'll start seeing boats that are coming over, other than a 50, 60 hertz electrical system issue. A lot of the stuff's going to start looking familiar because it's just an easier way to build. And so that's what we see in the future, which honestly, 6, 9 months ago, you told me this was going to happen, I would have said, no way, they'll never meet. It's never going to happen. So the alternate route is something we're incredibly excited about. This is the mom and apple pie guidance. So this is directly from the Recreational Craft Directive, RCD-2 we call it. And it says stuff such as, all watercraft shall be designed as to minimize the risk of sinking. Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, now how are you going to achieve that? How's it going to happen? Then you go to the ISO standard and you find that there's 27 standards that say here's stability, here's capacity, here's scalings, here's this. They all add up to meet this one line. Okay? In ABYC, we have 2 standards that take care of that. Okay? It's not an issue. All right, so that's why the European builders are pretty happy with it. So you can say H8, H5, capacity and flotation. Boom, you met it. Okay, done. The one thing we don't have in the United States is categories. Anybody familiar with the ISO categories? I'm joking, you probably remember some of that stuff. And we'll go over them in detail later, but ISO is actually, or the RCD has gone one step further than the Americans do, and they say, you need to tell me, Mr. Builder, how you're going, what you intend this boat to be used in. Is it big waves, long voyages, or is it a small pond and you know, no, not even a ripple? How are you going to do this? What category are you going to be in from A to D? And that's something that is spelled out in the RCD, and that's part of the reason why the ISO standards are so complicated, because they have a calculation for category A, they have a calculation for category B, category C, and category D. Okay. Bottom line is, if you take a 19-foot 4 winds here in the United States, it's a category B boat. built to ABYC, it already matches category B for ISO. So we don't have a lot of work that we have to do there. But that's the way this happens. So you'll see things like self-draining, ventilation fittings, fuel system. This just basically says the boat shouldn't blow up. Okay. Customer service nightmare. We like to keep our customers alive. We want to keep people in boating. So this basic statement is backed up by several standards, as you know, not just fuel, but also electrical. We do things like ignition protection and some other things to make sure that we can meet that standard. Another new requirement, and this is where the Brexit thing comes in. We are now required to have an EU member state issue the MIC code. If you don't know what a MIC code is, it's the Manufacturer Identification Code. The ISO standards were developed from ABYC standards, so you will see a lot of things that are very familiar here. So this right here, the first 3 letters is your Manufacturer Identification Code. So I'll pick on Sea Ray again. SEA is the US MIC code for every Sea Ray boat. So the first thing, first number you see is going to be that. A couple years ago, the Coast Guard accepted a country code prior to the HIN number or the SIN number, craft identification number, they call it over in Europe. So you will have a country code, US dash for Sea Ray, for instance, and then you'll have the SEA. Okay? The problem was they are no longer accepting a US Coast Guard issued MIC for American built boats. So immediately, all the manufacturers went to their closest friend notified body and decided they were going to buy MIC codes, crossing their fingers that Sea Ray would get SEA and Wellcraft would get WEL, and all the MIC codes that you're familiar with, to see what would happen. So where'd they go? They went to Great Britain. They went to the British Marine Federation. They decided they're going to buy a whole slew of MIC codes. Brunswick owns like what, 376 companies right now? So they went and bought a ton of MIC codes over there. What happens 3 months after they buy the MIC codes? The Brits say, screw the EU, we're going off on our own, right? And he's happy about it. This is great. What happens to Sea Ray? What happens to Brunswick? They just bought 375 MIC codes. They are no longer going to be valid in the EU. So now they have to go find some other country that is going to sell them MIC codes. Fortunately, you haven't gotten your act together yet, and you haven't really made the official divorce. So for right now, everything's okay. But in the meantime, people are going to start buying up all these MIC codes through Brussels, through France, through Spain, through Italy, wherever they want to go. So if you're a boat company that's going over to one, don't buy your MIC code from Great Britain, okay? But 2, you need to try to find the one that you can that matches your product. Otherwise, you are now going to have Sea Ray built in Tennessee going to some dealer in New Jersey, Sea Ray built in Tennessee going to your dealer in the UK or France, and you're going to have to go ahead and put a new HIN on that because you have a different MIC number. Right. So it is causing a problem. The minute you think that things in Bloomberg News don't affect our boat building community, start to think again, because all of this stuff has a butterfly effect. That at that meeting that we were at where we figured it out, even the British Marine Federation didn't even think about that. So all these things are new, and in my business, this kind of stuff is kind of fun to follow. So we're involved in it. But that is a new requirement with the new RCD, again, just in place. Next one, new design categories. If you didn't know the old ones, this isn't going to make any difference to you at all. But if you knew the old ones, you'll see that this is a much simpler table. The other one had all sorts of rhetoric in it. This one has a Beaufort scale for wind, and it has a significant wave height, and there's ways to test that. It also had things like how many bursts you have to have, how many gallons of water you have to carry, things like that. So this right now is really what we're looking at. Most boats built in the United States, when you're talking express cruiser types and things, are going to be in your category B. Okay? Take a Catalina 42 center cockpit. Jerry Douglas designs to category A. Island packet, big boats, they'll design to category A. Okay, but most of what you see that we're exporting to Europe from the American boats are going to be category B. Okay? And again, the big thing about using the ABYC standards as an alternate means to compliance with the RCD is the fact that we don't recognize these. So we have to turn around and say, all right, if you do this, you're going to be category B. We will figure that out. It's really not a big deal for us to do. And this, again, anytime you see typewritten stuff like this, it's directly out of the RCD. It's not a huge document. It really is not big. Yes?
So did ISO drop the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4?
0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Boat rating.
I was never aware of a rating, but the A, B, C, and D was that it's always been that way.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, actually.
Yeah, I'm only familiar with the A through D. That it could be something that I missed or something I'm not familiar with. But yeah, if you find that, let me know and I'll do some research for you.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, happy to do that. Also, if you want to look at a copy of the RCD, if you just seriously can't sleep one night, this is available online. One of my favorite resources for all my European stuff is a group called IMSI. I don't know if you know them, but they're the International Marine Certification Institute, imci.org. They're out of Brussels, and he's got a lot of information on his website that is extremely helpful if you have a client or a customer that is looking to export to Europe. Or you're taking a look at it as a surveyor, you're looking at a boat that's just come across. This is really horrible, this requirement, and I've sat in 3 meetings now trying to deal with this. We've always had visibility from the helm, and it's really basically been the same thing as ABYC, which is our H1 document. But now they want visibility from sailboats. You have to have adequate visibility. Problem is you got these large pieces of material that are kind of up there, and they can't necessarily see. So we sat in a committee to try to figure out how we're going to deal with a visibility requirement for sailboats. So this is where the SEN guy comes in. So we say, hey, how about we just say that sailboats don't need to meet the visibility requirements when the sails are up? And everybody around the table goes, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Stuart comes back from the bathroom and goes, what are you guys talking about? Well, this is what we're doing. He goes, no, I can't do that. It says sailboats. It doesn't say sails deployed. It doesn't say anything like that. It says sailboats. So you're going to have to figure this out. So just one word from the SEN guy makes us spend a whole load of time figuring this out. Where we got to on this, which I think is pretty ingenious because I came up with it, was that if you're thinking about sailing, right, you're attached at some point to a wheel, right? But you're not necessarily standing in front of a powerboat wheel where you're looking at this and you get up on a plane and you have bending and all sorts of things. You're not stuck there. You have a cockpit that you can kind of roam around in while your hand's on the wheel. So we came up with a zone of compliance. So from the wheel, you can go aft, side to side, and you can lean over to the side. And so as long as you have adequate visibility somewhere within this bubble centered on the wheel, you can comply with the zone of visibility. So instead of making all sails clear, which was one suggestion, or at least the bottom third, which would be really weird, we now are able to just say, okay, we meet the visibility requirements because the boat owner can grab the wheel, lean over to the side, and look underneath. Which I think makes a lot of sense. So they're still honing that and they're working on it, but that will be the next document. As you can see, the documents haven't even caught up with the RCD deadline. So right now, you have no way to comply with this. So there's this other group with another acronym out there called the RSG. It's the Regional Sectoral Group. That is all the notified bodies get together in a room like this, and they decide, well, the RCD says we need visibility from sailboats. We don't have a document that supports that yet, so how are we going to evaluate this? They get together and come to a consensus. They publish something called the RSG guidelines, also available at the IIMCI.org, and that is the interpretation of the inspection of a craft where a standard doesn't exist, or maybe there's, even if the standard does exist, there's a little bit of issue with the way it's interpreted. So there is a group that does define how to look at the RCD requirements. And they are not, I guess they're as official as they can be. It's really a large group that gets together and talks about this stuff. Just like ABYC a couple of years ago, they've now gotten into multi-hull buoyancy. So before they had the same issue as ABYC and the Coast Guard did, which is one single footprint in the water equals a regular hull. If you had 2 footprints in the water, it's still outside the federal regulations. ABYC does talk about it. But now it's flotation capacity, a number of other things dealing with catamarans. They've always dealt with sailing catamarans and things, but when you're talking buoyancy and flotation, it's usually less than 26 feet. Okay, so that's the way they've dealt with it. They did, and something I forgot to mention in the beginning, they did retain the 24 meters or less measurement for the recreational craft directive. If a boat is over 24 meters, then you're looking at some classification society, whether it be Lloyd's, Bureau Veritas, any of those. Okay, so that's really the difference here. So we are talking strictly under 24 meters, or 24 meters and less, excuse me. This one's interesting, sailing catamarans. The French love their catamarans. And the French have a large contingent of people that are running some of the committee meetings. So in the RCD, you end up with an escape hatch requirement for catamarans. So now there is a requirement to have some kind of escape hatch for catamarans. There is a standard that backs it up. There is a waterproof type hatch. This particular one is actually kind of facing just the other hull, so that works as well. But that is new, and it's multi-hull craft. There's some requirements. So Menno's Glacier Bay that does not need an escape hatch. It's not a habitable craft. Okay, so if you have a galley and a head and things like that, you're going to need some kind of escape hatch down there. This is what I talked about before. So no grandfathering. You cannot take your 2010 model that you've been building to ABYC and ISO and go ahead and just place it on the market. It can't be done. It has to be evaluated to the new RCD. And oh, by the way, the notified body that you've been using for 20 years, they also have to get reevaluated to the new RCD. So if you've been working with a company that hasn't had the forward thinking to go ahead and get recertified under the new RCD, you're going to have to find another company to work with. Okay. This is an extreme example, obviously, but there's a company in Florida that builds a ton of boats that has been on the phone with our tech vice president, a guy named Craig Skolton, who's been building boats for 30 years. He's logged 19 hours with the engineer down at this boat company trying to comply with the new RCD. They just did not pay attention at all, and their boats were turned away by the shipload in Finland when they tried to drop them off there. So there's a whole load of non-compliant boats are sitting in the somewhere in some depot, and they have to get returned. So as a dealer in Finland, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to find another boat company. It's just the way it's going to happen. So the ramifications of this are huge. The other thing I didn't mention was in the old RCD, market surveillance, which is basically when the boat gets there, who looks at it, was not a big deal. You could pretty much get any boat into the European Union through Greece that you wanted to. Okay, as long as you had a dealer from Greece, you would get the paperwork, everything would be done, nobody looked at it. They actually have a way to do market surveillance now. So the RCD does support that, and they have the ability to turn stuff away very easily. So the builders have to be watching this stuff. The declarations of conformity have to be proper. Everything's got to be there. Electrical systems. I just brought this out because you know electrical systems well. This was in the old one, so this is starting circuits. This just talks about overcurrent protection. Electric propulsion was added. A new thing that was added to, which I'm the convener of the electrical standard. So basically, I get to write the stuff and everybody gets to validate it. That's kind of the way ISO works. If you're the convener, you're the project leader, you're just the guy that does all the work, okay? And then everybody gets to comment on the work. I am having a heck of a time with the ventilation calculation because this specifically states that we have to now ventilate a battery space, which I think is counterproductive, to be honest with you, because as Menno just said, a lot of these new battery technologies don't need ventilation. But now I have to change a modern standard to meet old technology. So there's not much we can do about this. It's got to be in there. And it doesn't specifically say, again, my friend Stuart would look at this and he would say, well, it doesn't say anything about a battery that doesn't gas. Okay? It says specifically ventilation shall be provided. Okay? It doesn't say something even easier, which would be prevent the accumulation of explosive gases. If it said that, my interpretation of that is, you don't put a lead acid battery in a boat. You just don't do it anymore. Okay, and that would be easier than the calculation that I have to come up with, which is actually in the Australian electrical standard, which talks about the volume and what size openings you have to have. And the other thing it says, okay, this one doesn't say that, but the ABYC, if you try to have ABYC meet whatever requirement we do here, ABYC says specifically ventilated outside the boat, which is even a larger problem. So for this one, we could probably just drill some quarter hole sizes, quarter hole sizes in the compartment will be okay. All right, so it's an interesting thing that we have to deal with on a standards level, and we'll be finishing that one in June. New to the, I don't know why this wasn't there before, but you now actually have to add the manufacturer's address to the builder's plate. Seems kind of like a no-brainer. It's just one of those things that people pay attention to. ReBoarding is interesting. This ABYC has had this for a while, but you have to actually have it operable and accessible by the person in the water, and there's a test to do that. So this particular one, if you're familiar with this boat model, you'll see that the ladder would actually slide up and go inside a hole which has a fiberglass deck on it. Okay, so the idea would be that you would be down there by the bow eye, and you would have to reach up, flip up a 6 or 8 pound fiberglass lid, and then reach and grab it and pull it down. I don't think this particular ladder would meet the intent of what the SEM consultant would want to see in a standard. Okay, you have to be able to physically do it. Now, the ones that are on a swim platform, perhaps, they come out of the back and go down, not a problem. Okay, but this particular style ladder, which is on a number of boats, it's a great job for keeping people away from the propeller. You give them an A mark, an A plus on that one. But when it comes to actually being able to use it while you're in the water, somebody may put maybe a tag on it, or maybe make it so that you can pull it out from down here, who knows? But there's got to be someone that fix that to meet the new requirements of the RCD. This is interesting. This is now a standard instead of just a state-by-state regulation like we have here in the United States. No more direct discharges. Okay, so there's no way to directly plumb the stuff overboard. They want to hold the black water. They also want to hold the gray water. That's a little bit different conversation. You have two choices. You can hold it or treat it. The issue is there is no viable standard for the treatment of black water in the EU. So depending on which notified body you're going to use, they're going to evaluate it differently. They may use a municipal standard. They may use something else. But the best way to do it now is to hold it. So every boat that's in the EU now is a holding tank, which is pretty much the same here for what's going on in the United States too. But no direct discharge. That also means that little switch that you get with your Dometic vacuum flush that allows you to flip a seacock and just kind of pump it overboard, it's not kosher either. So you got to hold it, you have to pump it out. There's also a provision in the bilge pump system, which you have to avoid accidental discharge of oil and water and things like that. Right now, if you had to meet that solution, it's going to be one of those little two-pronged things that says, hey, this is water, this is not oil. So you can comply with that right now, but it's specifically stated in the RCD at this point. Engines, they're matching the US, which is nice. The EPA is known globally for reasonable emissions requirements. So they went with EPA and CARB, and then obviously the EPA Tier 3 on the diesel, which is everything that's coming out now. That's really not a big deal either. It's just specifically stated in RCD, where it wasn't before. They really left emissions to something else. But now the emissions for marine engines is part of Technical Committee 188, which is small craft. It used to be with an engine group, and now it's been rolled into TC 188. This is interesting. A lot of people don't know this. So when you think of the CE mark, obviously it's probably on every phone that you guys have out there. You see it all over things. The CE mark is only required to be on a very small amount of components in the boat. What a lot of savvy marketing people do, where's Meadow, are you in the room? Right, good, I can talk about it. So what a lot of savvy marketing people do is they have the CE mark on everything. It doesn't matter what it is. What you don't know is that if you have an inverter and it's got a white cover on it, that CE mark could actually be applying to the shade of white that was used on the cover and have nothing to do with the piece of equipment that you're actually buying. So they'll comply to a number of directives just so they can legally put the CE mark on it. And it's a very shifty and crafty way to do things. And what it makes you think as surveyors who look at this stuff all the time is that, hey, this battery charger has a CE mark on it, this one doesn't, it should have a CE mark. It doesn't need to.
Do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We do it here in the country, in the US to a certain extent. So let's say you're UL listing some Christmas lights, right? You could UL list the Christmas lights because you've used the appropriate color green for a Douglas fir. And that's a UL standard. So you have listed to that UL standard for the color of the wire that you used. It isn't necessarily the whole string of Christmas lights.
And that's legal.
That's legal. Yeah.
Well, what about putting it on something that's not required?
Absolutely legal. You can put it on anything you want. So early transformers that came out, they were actually, there's no requirement or anything for a CE mark on a boat transformer, okay? You're gonna stick a transformer on there and you can CE mark it to the office equipment directive, because the office equipment directive has a transformer, which is basically that brick that you plug your computer into. So the CE mark that's on the brick that's on your computer was the one that was also applied to the boat transformer. Is it legal? Absolutely. It is a transformer. Does it mean anything? Yeah, in the office environment it does. It doesn't necessarily mean anything here. I mean, people have used medical device directives. They've used all sorts of things to apply the CE mark. So it is a shady business when it comes to applying the CE mark. The notified body has done nothing wrong when they do this. Manufacturer said, please apply the CE mark as to the shade of white that I'm using, that it's applicable to products north of the equator. I'm not kidding. You think I'm making this stuff up? I'm not. I do make stuff up, but I usually tell you when I make it up. So this is Annex 2. This is the famous annex that tells you exactly what needs to be CE marked. Ignition protected equipment, no brainer. And it's also required to be marked here in the United States. Starting gear protection devices for outboard engines. Weird, but it's got to be CE marked. So basically what you're looking at is a control with a neutral holding mechanism. Okay, so that when you turn the key, it's not going to go. Steering wheels, it's basically the same testing we have in the United States, but that has to be CE marked. So a wheel actually has to be marked. Fuel tanks, great idea. Okay, and the hoses that go to them, they all have to be CE marked. And for some reason, prefabricated hatches and port lights. I never figured that one out, but that's what they want. So you'll see any of the major hatch brands that you're looking at are going to have a CE mark on it. And so when you see that CE mark, you are confident that that was marked to a marine grade standard. We're not just talking about the light transmission of the tint on the window. Okay, we're actually talking about the hatch construction when you see it. But if you're looking at a, I don't know, name another component, a bilge pump, for instance, okay, it's got a CE mark on it. What's that CE mark for? Probably ignition protection, but it's got nothing to do with the capacity of the pump or the construction of the pump other than the ignition protection qualities. Okay, so that's something to look out for. It's just something interesting. And if you ever want to, you can go to the European Union's website and you can look up the CE mark and try to figure out what it is. Okay, so you see it on there, take a picture of it, take a picture of the model number. They list every single component that has a CE mark on there. So this is my final slide. This is the Declaration of Conformity. This is exactly the form that needs to be filled out by the notified body with the product that they're looking at. You can see down, and I know it's tough to see, but it's the only way to display it. You'll see here all of the different requirements that have to be met, okay, according to the notified body and sent. You will see here, and if you could read this, on the right-hand side, it would say the presumption of conformity standard, which is the ISO standard, or the standard that the notified body used to evaluate compliance. What we want to see in the next 2 to 4 years is all ABYC. And when that's done and the European Commission accepts it, which if a notified body that's already been authorized to do this does it, then the European Commission will accept it. Then we've done what we wanted to do. Okay, we've made sure that you can ship a boat all over the world with ABYC compliance, which is a big thing, something like I said, that's how we do. But this is what a declaration of conformity looks like. You can look up boats declaration of conformity through the different websites, so you can see that kind of stuff, but this is what you would actually see. That's what it looks like. So in the instance of time, I did have a cutoff point for myself to not roll into some of the ABYC projects. So I think unless there's overwhelming need to hold off a little bit and go to ABYC, yes.
One of the things that you said before is that the stack paperwork to do the C's and conformity was about 4 foot tall. Seems to me like the stack of this paperwork has gotten a little shorter, or has it gotten taller?
I think the paperwork is about the same, because what you need, what you don't see here is, did the builder provide a technical file? So let's go back to that ladder that we saw, right? Okay, so Lloyd's question is, how big is this file going to be? So I need to decide that ladder is accessible by someone in the water. And I don't have any measurements or any other guidance from the standard other than the fact it's got to be accessible and usable by somebody in the water. So I, as a builder, put a boat in a pool, and I brought in 25 of my greatest friends, from my Aunt Tilly, who's 65, all the way down to my nephew, who's 5. And I had them walk in the pool, grab the ladder, climb out. I videoed the thing, I documented everything. That goes in my technical file. Okay? So all of this has to be backed up by the method by which you conformed. So if you put a bow eye in that boat and there's a pull strength on the bow eye, you better have the documentation that says that you pulled on that bow eye, okay, and you did what the standard said it was supposed to do. So I would say for the previous RCD, the good builders did that already, okay? In this RCD, it's essential. So I would say the paperwork didn't get any bigger, it's just the paperwork became more of an essential thing.
So what about some of the older boats that get shipped over there, like certainly places like that, where
So a used boat that's going over there?
used boat,
That's something.
like the ladder's not in the water, you know.
Yeah.
It's just
There's an assessment for a used boat going over there, which you can have done by a notified body.
Had to do one, that's why.
Yeah, well, so if it's a US boat that's going to Turkey, first of all, none of us are here going to be able to assess that. Okay? There are people that are trained to do that. What's that? Oh, yeah, well, so anyway, bottom line is, if you have something like that, and you've been asked to survey a boat to send over for a European client, let's say a yacht broker, and I give them the same advice that I'm giving you, the first thing you're going to want to do is call 1 of 2 notified bodies that I know. And you're going to say, guys, I have this boat, and then you're going to add a line item to the invoice that says European assessment, $4 grand.
That's what we did, we just
Exactly.
did a survey, and then get a lot of out of the area.
Yeah, IMC is a great one. He's got inspectors here. There's some other ones that we're working with, but yeah, you're gonna have to call somebody. It's called a post-construction assessment or PCA, and it's very detailed and has to be done by somebody who works for a notified body. Don't even try to do it yourself. Because what you don't want is you don't want it to sit in some yard in Finland. Right, and it's your problem. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, charge a lot, and I would say if MC tells you $2 grand, put another $2 grand on top of it. Maybe it's called delusion. Yeah.
Is there a website for all these recalls we're talking about?
Oh, for Europe? Absolutely not. For the United States, yes.
What website is that?
You can either go to recalls.gov and look up U.S. Coast Guard because it's done by division, or you can actually go to uscgboating.org, which also has a recalls website, and you can look it up by company, by NIC number, by however you want. Yes.
And when will Coast Guard go to ABYC requirements or recommendations?
Okay, well, that's part of our new regime change here is for every regulation you're going to publish, you're going to reveal how many? 2, right? So we have on the books right now a beautiful roadmap to putting ABYC documents into the federal regulations. I can tell you right now, it's worth about as much as the toilet paper in that bathroom. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not saying it's a great thing to have ABYC regs in there because they're going to put it in with a date. So if we change something that we think is going to address, maybe one of Meadows' new products and it's a spectacular standard, you're still going to have the Coast Guard one there. Now the good news for you guys is, I don't know if you've heard about this, but the 46 CFR, anybody inspect tugs and barges here? The 46 CFR now has ABYC standards in there as an alternative for compliance for tugs and barges. Great stuff. So if you know ABYC, you're good to go. ABYC has a book if you're interested in it, and it includes all the standards. They did reference older standards like E11 2003, for instance, but I've heard from the inspectors that they're going to inspect the newer standard.
However, it's older boats that have the Romex wire and the old.
Yeah, well, they had 5 years to comply. So as they fix things, they got to choose a standard. ABS, us, we're abundantly cheaper. Yes.
I've got most of the ISO standards. Are those being updated?
You own them?
Yes.
Yeah, what you want to do is just compare the year on yours to the year on the ISO website. And TC188 is the subgroup that you want to look at, and then you'll know whether it's out of date or not. I can tell you the electrical one's going to be republished probably this fall. We're meeting in June to finish it up. So depending on when you bought them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can tell you the cheapest place to get ISO standards is the British Marine Federation. They have a really nice program to be able to buy the ISO standards. If you need them. You can always call us too. If you're an ABYC member, we always need your calls and we'll set the standard up for you and say what's going on. Anything else? All right, well, I think I've kept you guys from your lunch long enough. Appreciate your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
It's lunch.